Great. It looks like the meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. So Ed, why don't you go ahead and take it away with our introductions?
Yes, okay. Thank you for everyone for joining us this evening. We've worked very hard to get the judge candidates here tonight and get some time to ask them questions. We have a format which Liz will describe when she takes over on the questioning. I want to urge everyone to please get your absentee ballot if you haven't. Return your absentee ballot as soon as possible. And also go to the Board of Elections website for Tompkins County, where there are instructions for early voting and where you can vote. And I guess other than that, I can let the questions begin.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. And also just to add on to that, I know that Jennifer Lyons is going to be posting in the Zoom chat with links to the places that Ed mentioned. So the Board of Elections website and also their phone number, and our YouTube will also have that information in the description. So thank you so much. It's really great to be here. I want to really briefly go over the format for tonight. We're going to start off with some introductory statements. Each candidate will have 4 minutes. We're going to have Seth start and then Dan. Then we're going to move into a series of 11 questions, and the candidates will have 2 minutes each to respond. We're going to alternate the order of who answers the questions first, so we'll go back and forth. And then at the end, we'll have closing statements, and those will be 2 minutes long, and Seth will go first and then Dan. The one extra thing that we're doing is if a candidate wants to respond after the initial 2 minutes that each candidate has had a response, if they want to add an extra minute, we are allowing that at their request. So we'll see how that goes. But for any of the meatier topics, we may see candidates wanting to have that 1 extra minute. So that's what we're going to do. So we've got our 4 minutes up on the clock. So I am going to go ahead and invite Seth to get us started.
Well, first, thank you for setting up this Zoom format. It's been extremely difficult with the virus lockdown to actually campaign. So I really appreciate the Tompkins County Committee really just helping candidates to conduct these forums. I've been on the committee before. I know how important the work is that you do, whether it's getting signatures or getting out the vote. So your work here is critical in this time where you had to make this change and actually try to have a campaign and get the information to the voters. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Peacock. I'm the Ithaca City Court Judge. I am happy to be here with you all and happy to have this opportunity to answer your questions. There are 3 reasons why I'm asking for your vote in this upcoming primary. The first reason is that I have the experience. I'm the only candidate who has actual judicial experience. The second reason is I have the proper judicial temperament. And the third reason is I've shown throughout my time in Ithaca that I've made the proven commitment to serve this community. Before I talk about those 3 reasons, I first wanted to give you a sense of my background. I grew up in New York City, was raised by my mom and my sister in public housing. Like many kids who came out of that situation, I didn't have a lot of guidance, didn't have a career path. So I got out of high school and got a job driving trucks. I became a tractor trailer driver with the Teamsters Union and did that for about 10 years. I always thought I should be educated, but I really never knew how to navigate the education system. My mom passed away when I was about 25. And ironically, today is her birthday, June 1st, and she would have been 85 today. She passed away when I was 25, and at that time, it kind of motivated me to get my education. Fortunately for me, there was a CUNY public school in New York City. I went into the CUNY system, graduated, did well, and eventually got accepted into Cornell Law School. And that's how I came to found this great place, Ithaca. My experience as an attorney after I graduated is I worked at a large corporate law firm for a few years, and then we had an opportunity to come back to Ithaca to make this our home. I want to focus on the experience. My experience as judge has led me to run two of the most critical programs. The first one is our drug court. When I was judge before, I ran the drug court program, and I implemented a screening process that really enhanced the ability for people to engage with that program. Now, as a judge, I'm running the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court, which is our mental health court. That program is saving lives every day. My judicial temperament is key. The legitimacy of the court system is based on how people are treated when they're engaged with the system. My key focus every day is to treat people with dignity, respect, kindness. The last thing I'll say is my proven commitment. I've served on the Ithaca City School Board for 12 years and also served on the BOCES board. As many of you know, some say this is a thankless job, but I'm committed to nothing more. Nothing is more important for me than our young people. And I've done that as a board member, and I'll continue to do that as a judge, and I will serve those young people and try to keep them on the right path. Thank you, and I hope to have your vote on the upcoming primary, June 23rd.
Thank you, Seth. Dan?
Thank you. Like Seth, I want to begin by thanking the committee for putting this together. I know a fair bit of work goes into it, and it has been a difficult campaign since we can't go knock on doors. So thank you, I really appreciate it. I'm Dan Johnson. I'm asking for your vote for Ithaca City Court Judge, and in a moment I'm going to talk about why I think I'm worthy of that. But I want to address two things before I get there. The first is the pandemic itself. I want to say thank you to the healthcare workers who have worked to keep us safe and who have treated the ill during these times. And I want to thank the essential workers who went to their jobs day in and day out so many of us can stay home and be safe. And the other thing I want to talk about is racism. In the past few weeks and months, America's racist history has been laid bare as being ever present and ever powerful in our lives. As a white person, I know that I don't have the experience that my neighbors who are people of color do. And I know that as a white person, I need to speak up. We need to address these things, and we need to do better than we've done. In terms of the criminal justice system, we need to do better as well. In New York, we've begun those changes with bail reform, discovery reform, and these are meaningful steps in the right direction. But we need to continue that work. When I was in law school, my interest in criminal law began. I began working as a student attorney, and I represented folks in Boulder Municipal Court, which is a court much like Ithaca City Court. When I finished law school, I began working in the Fort Collins District Attorney's Office. And I took the job, even though my interest had always been in defense, because the people I met there were committed to doing the right thing and working hard on behalf of their community. And that's what I've done in the years since. I've worked hard on behalf of the community, either as I've been with a district attorney's office there or here, and as a defense attorney as well. In addition, I've spent at this point probably 14 years serving in various drug courts. I presently serve in the Tompkins County Felony Treatment Court. I've previously served in the Ithaca City Treatment Court. And before either of those, I served in a juvenile drug court and in the adult drug court in Fort Collins. I think my drug court work is relevant for two reasons. The first is it demonstrates my commitment to helping people who are in the system build healthy, sober lives that can hopefully keep them out of the system. The other aspect of drug court that is relevant is that drug court works because it works off of the relationship between the judge and the participants. And that's a dynamic that's at work anytime someone is in court. And that experience will help me ensure that anyone who comes before me as a judge leaves feeling treated fairly, regardless of the outcome of their case. In addition to those aspects of my career, I want to turn and talk about my commitment to the city of Ithaca. My wife and I moved here in '04, and we moved here so she could pursue her degree at Cornell, and the plan had had been to get the degree and to go somewhere else, wherever jobs led us. But as is often the case here, we fell in love with the community, and we've been in Fall Creek since 2006. We're raising our children here, and I've done all the things here that folks do. I've coached them, and I'm glad to be here because this is a good place to raise a family. I'm running for Ithaca City Court because I want to make sure that the standards of excellence are upheld, that we continue to make Ithaca a place that is welcoming and open for all. So on June 23rd, I ask you to vote for me. In fact, I ask you to apply for an absentee ballot before then, and don't go there in person. Do it by mail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Dan, you're going to answer our first question first. And it is, what part of your background has best prepared you to be a city court judge?
The aspects of my background that I think have best prepared me for a situation such as being an Ithaca City Court judge are my drug court experience that I've touched on, and in addition to that, the extensive amount of time I've spent in court, both working as an assistant district attorney and also as a defense attorney. When I moved to New York, I sat for the New York bar, I passed the bar, and I began working, and I was working up in Syracuse doing defense work. The benefit that I reaped from that position was that I went all over upstate New York, from the Adirondacks to the Southern Tier to Rochester to Syracuse, and I appeared in many, many courts. Local courts like town courts, I appeared in many city courts and numerous county courts as well. And as someone who's new to New York practice and New York's criminal procedure law, I got to see many, many different judges handle the same sort of situations, and I got to see them do it differently. When you see 10, 20, 30 different judges do arraignments, you begin to realize what's important about an arraignment and how to do it in a fashion that best serves the interests, to make sure that the defendant is advised of their rights, that those rights are protected. So my work in that regard as a defense attorney and also as a prosecutor, I think equips me to do this job very well. As a prosecutor, it's a different job, frankly, from being a defense attorney. As a prosecutor, we have the burden, and so we have to meet that. We have to know the facts. We have to conduct the investigations. And those are important things for a judge to have done. One of the aspects of a judge's work is to review the work of law enforcement, either at an early stage in reviewing subpoenas or later on during motion practice. And my extensive experience as an assistant district attorney equips me to know when law enforcement has done its job properly. In that regard, I've also worked closely with law enforcement. At the same time, I've also prosecuted police when it called for it. And because of that experience, I think I am equipped to be a city court judge.
Thank you. Seth?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to take a bit of a different tack in terms of how I answer that. And I'm going to focus the answer on what life experience you bring to the bench. Both Dan and I have extensive experience in the courtroom as attorneys. We've been practicing about the same period of time. But really distinguishes me is what I bring. Number one, what I bring as an African American. Number two, what I bring as a committed community member who has deep ties and relationships with most of the people that appear in the court. That gives me a slight advantage in that I know the lives of the people appearing in city court. And more importantly, they know me and they know what I'm about. So when I issue decisions, when I pass sentences, when I make determinations on motions, the people appearing before me know who I am, know that I'm fair, know what I'm about. In this time of crisis, where our criminal justice system has so many questions about its legitimacy, it's important in our community, what we can do here is to have somebody in there who has that credibility, has that legitimacy, that the people trust, that the people know what he's about. They know how he served their children. So that is what I bring. In addition to the Ithaca times that I've lived here, I've also bring my experience as a family member dealing with family members who have struggled with addiction. To know that personally, to see that day in and day out is really important, because you can't just vilify people with addiction issues, nor can you kind of vilify and separate folks struggling with mental health issues. So on a personal level, on a life experience, that's what I bring, in addition to the strong legal background as well.
Thank you, Seth. So
Liz?
for our, yeah,
Could I have a minute to respond?
absolutely. So you'll each get 1 minute.
Thank you. The first point I want to make, Seth referred to vilifying folks who have either addiction or mental health issues. I've dedicated a good portion of my career to working in drug courts because I believe those people need help. People who deal with addiction are just like the rest of us, except for some reason that frankly none of us know. They've got an addiction and the rest of us don't. I think it's very important that the system help those people, and that's why I've worked in drug courts for so long. It's not the traditional work of an assistant district attorney to do that. Traditionally, district attorneys and assistant district attorneys go into court and engage in the adversarial process. Further, in terms of ties to the community, I feel mine goes about as deep as Mr. Peacock's do. I've been here about the same length of time. I'm raising my children here. This community is very important to me.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Seth, you now have another minute as well.
That's fine. I think I've stated my position and answered the question.
Great.
I don't need any additional time.
Okay, so moving on, question number 2, and this question you will answer first, Seth. So nice we have you up on the screen. From your point of view, what values are necessary for a judge to have?
I think the most important value is probably a healthy level of respect that you give to the people appearing before you. Our court system is pretty simple. It's a forum that we bring people together to resolve disputes because we frankly don't want people handling it on their own. So the legitimacy that you bring to that setting is critical in being a successful and legitimate institution. The way you do that not only affects the outcome and the feelings that people have about it, but it also affects the community that you build outside of the judicial system. One of the things I've tried to do is to be a judge who's in the community, who knows the community. For example, I've opened the court to student groups to come visit. I've opened the court to organizations like the Village at Ithaca. I've made a commitment prior to the lockdown to at least once a month go have lunch at Loaves and Fishes. So I think my ability to realize that I'm part of this community, I have to enforce and support this community's values, is enhanced when people know what I'm about and they see me in town, in various places, and able to navigate at all different levels and all different groups in the community.
Great. Thank you, Seth. Dan?
Thank you. The values that are necessary for a judge, frankly, are those that are often unseen in the sense that when we see a judge in court, that's a sliver of the judge's work. Behind the scenes, before court starts, judges have to put in time. You have to put in time to know your cases, to be current on the law, to interact with other agencies in the criminal justice system to make sure you're handling things efficiently. My experience is working in multiple different large offices aids me in that regard, and that I'm accustomed to working with other agencies. I know how to bring people together to address the common interest we all serve. In terms of the law, I don't feel it's overstating it to say that I know criminal law extremely well. I've dedicated myself to it. I've put in years of research in the law. Part of my habit is to maintain currency on new decisions, new laws that come down. Especially now, as the courts are implementing our discovery and bail law changes, it's more important than ever that our judges be experts in the law. And frankly, if I'm the judge, that's what the Ithaca City Court will get. They'll get a judge who comes to court prepared, who knows the law, and because of his experience handling both sides of things, he issues fair rulings. I will say this, Mr. Peacock has referred a couple times to the fact that he knows the community, and indeed he does. I agree with him. At the same time, I think there is some advantage for a judge, if not having a distance, at least having a perspective of not knowing everybody in that same regard, because frankly, not everyone who comes to court is going to be the judge's acquaintance or friend. And everyone, no matter where they come from, needs to be treated fairly.
Thank you, Dan. So you're going to answer the next question first. Can you
Right.
please?
Can I, I'm not sure. I did want to respond to that.
Oh,
I don't know if
absolutely.
now's the appropriate time.
No, now it's
I
fine.
just, I just want to address some of what was said. I think the statement that the judge should know the law is frankly a given. That's what we do as attorneys. We know the procedure, we know the decisions, we research it, we try to stay up on all the new developments, new arguments. So I appreciate that, but what I think really enhances my role as judge is the given that I understand that that's the role in knowing the law and implementing it and making difficult decisions based on that law and following that law. But you're a much better judge when you bring the extra information to it. Anyone can know the law. Any good attorney can know the law. It's what you bring to it as a human being, because you're dealing with human beings.
Thank you, Seth. Dan, you have another minute now if you'd like.
I'll pass.
Okay, great. So we'll keep you up on the screen though, because we'll move on to the next question, which is, can you speak to your involvement in the community and what impact that has or may have for you on the bench?
Certainly. Well, I think my prime involvement in the community is the fact that I've been serving as an assistant district attorney since 2006 when Gwen Wilkinson hired me. And frankly, that's how I've chosen to manifest my public service and my career is through that. Outside of my work, my wife and I are raising our 3 daughters here. I've coached them. I attend, of course, all their sporting activities. And so we're involved in the community in that way as well. And so I think I'm, as are many Ithacans, engaged through our children.
Thank you. Seth?
Well, as I stated before, I served as a volunteer board member for the Ithaca City School District for about 10 years. And then once I left the school district, I again volunteered to serve as a board member in BOCES. So my commitment to young people is without question. And I'll tell you why I have that commitment. I have that commitment because frankly, education changed my life, right? I went from public housing to an Ivy League law school. And that was all based on educational opportunities that were provided to me, that I had nothing to do with, that people who came before me created the SUNY system, allowed me to be a truck driver and drive from 3 to 11 and then attend classes all day and only pay $2,000 for tuition. That's an incredible institution, and that institution changed my life. That institution has made my children's lives better. That institution has an African-American attorney, Cornell law grad in Ithaca that can represent defendants. That institution has allowed me, for example, to not only did I coach my children, but when I went to BJM, before my kids were even old enough to play sports, I saw my role as an African-American male leader in this community to say, you know what, I'm not only going to coach my children, I'm going to coach other people's children. And I've done that for years. That there are literally hundreds of kids that I've coached. And the great thing is I started with these kids in 3rd grade, and I can see them graduate, go to high school, go to middle school. And those are the kind of connections that I bring to the job. That's the kind of commitment that I have to this community. And that's the kind of commitment I've shown to this community. And every day when I'm in court, that commitment shows because I make my decisions based on knowing the people in addition to having the legal background.
Thank you, Seth. The next question, Seth will answer first. A significant aspect of being a city court judge is dealing with civil matters. Can you speak to your experience regarding civil matters, particularly summary eviction proceedings and civil lawsuits?
Well, I'm glad that this question was raised. Right now, the court system in effect has been, I would say shut down, but severely slowed down. In fact, on the landlord-tenant side, which is a major part of what Ithaca City Court does on its civil docket, has basically been frozen. The governor issued an order and said that there will be no eviction proceedings at all. So the expectation is that once the process is opened up again, there will be a tidal wave of civil cases that are filed by our local landlords. Now, you need someone who's prepared on day one to deal with that level and that number of cases that are coming. Now, the important thing is that those cases are critical to both the landlords and the tenants. Don't forget, in Ithaca, we have a lot of small landlords who have one or two properties, but then we also have a huge number of tenants, including students, including local people who live here. Those decisions you make are almost none of them are as important as, they're as important as any other decision that we make because it deals with people's ability to keep their mortgages paid and also their living situations. In addition to the particular experience I have as a city court judge dealing with the cases that we have in city court, I also have an extensive civil court background. As I said before, when I graduated from law school, I went to a large corporate firm that was exclusively dealing with civil matters. In my practice as a criminal attorney, I had a large portion of civil matters as well. So I do have extensive civil experience, both as an attorney and as a judge.
Thank you, Seth. Dan?
Thank you. My strength, my experience lies primarily in the criminal realm. The occasions on which I've handled civil matters, are fairly limited. And I'll be honest about that. I'm not going to claim I have a background I don't. At the same time, the reason I've been able to be successful in the criminal field is because I put the work in to know the law. And that's exactly what I would do with those sorts of matters. The occasions where I've actually engaged in civil matters, I can count on one hand, to be frank. The one that comes to mind is a civil forfeiture action that I did a few years ago. It was a case where TCAD had an employee who was stealing from them to the tune of $250,000. Under New York law at that time, and it's changed since, we as the district attorney's office could bring a civil action to try and get that money back. Going into it, I didn't know what I was doing. But what I did was I prepared myself. I accessed resources. I filed the appropriate paperwork. I figured out things I didn't know. And as a result, we got that $247,000 back. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not an expert in civil law. But what I am an expert in is applying myself and both knowing what I don't know so that I can prepare myself to actually handle it appropriately, and also in putting in the hard work. And so when the civil matters come before me as Ithaca City Court Judge, that's how to handle it, by putting in the hard work and being honest with myself and recognizing what I don't know.
Thank you. So this next question, Dan will answer first. We've witnessed some harsh examples of racial bias over the past several weeks. People of color are disproportionately dying from coronavirus. The deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor offer others a glimpse of the risks Black people face while out for a jog or sleeping in their own home. Locally, we've had our own issues with incidents of racial bias and economic disparity. Given all of that, how important is racial diversity on the bench? And how would you make sure that justice is administered fairly for everyone in your court?
Thank you. That's obviously a very important question. It always has been. Recent events have made it more so, if that's even possible. And again, I'm going to be honest. Mr. Peacock's a person of color, and we do need diversity on the bench. That's important to me too. If that were the only issue at stake, I would be supporting Mr. Peacock, but it's not. It's a broader question. in terms of how I would ensure that justice is administered fairly for everyone in my court, I think the answer is we have to essentially do things in a new way. A judge sits sort of at a later point, I will say, in the criminal proceedings. And what I mean by that is criminal cases start out there in the world. Something happens and the police respond, the prosecutors get involved, charges are filed. But a lot happens before a judge is involved. Once a judge is involved, however, he or she begins making decisions about the case. And that is where it gets really tricky. Because of course, we're all subject to implicit bias. And I think we all think we're trying to do the best thing. The only way to make sense of this in a real honest and true way is through the use of science and data. And I think that the courts going forward need to increase the use of that. Now, that's already beginning to change with some of the laws that are in effect now. The recent bail amendments do include provisions to collect data, to see that this is happening. And I'll be frank, I'm sure there's people who are not going to be happy with the results they see about the decisions they've made and those that others have. But we need to do that. We need to have an honest assessment of what our system is doing if we hope to make it truly just for everyone. And so those are the steps I would take in order to ensure that no matter the color of the person before me, they are treated fairly.
Thank you. Seth?
You know, I was shocked to learn that I recently went to a judicial gathering, and I was shocked to be the only judge of color in the room. And there was probably just about 100 judges there, and they were all from the 6th Judicial District, which encompasses 10 counties. But what really shocked me is when I learned, and it still shocks me even to say it today, that within the 6th Judicial District, within those 10 counties, which includes areas like Binghamton and Elmira and Ithaca, I'm the first and only person of color to serve on the bench. And I want that to sit for a minute and to realize that it's now 2020, and of all the hundreds of thousands of millions of people who have lived in that area, me, Seth Peacock, who frankly, based on my background and experience, shouldn't even be a lawyer, not to mention a judge, would be the first person of color to serve in this role. It's disturbing, but as strange as it is to be in this role, I feel very fortunate. I was raised and grew up and was born in a time where I could actually run to be judge. I could actually become an attorney. I could actually serve on the school board. I could be a homeowner. So in some ways, you know, I can look back and say, yeah, that's unfortunate. But in some ways, I'm happy that I have this opportunity. It's been a blessing. It's not easy to run for office, but to serve in this way and to be the one in the whole 6th Judicial District of 10 counties is a blessing. And I hope that the voters recognize that, and not only recognize that, but recognize who I am as an attorney, a judge, and a person.
Thank you. The next question Seth will answer first. The mental health court is credited with lowering crime and incarceration rates because it gets people treatment they need. What has been your experience with the mental health court, and how can we build on it going forward?
So I'm the presiding judge of the, we call it the Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court, but it is our mental health court, and it's been in operation for about a year. The great thing about this mental health court is that we've taken the court system and moved it from a punitive, harsh, totally focused on accountability to a true service model. As I preside over this court, we've developed a team, and this Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court team is made up of housing specialists, addiction specialists. We have a nurse on staff. I mean, we have contacts within the mental health community. We have contacts within the medical community. It's a true team that puts all their attention and focus on a person in crisis and gets them the help they need. Now, of course, there's a role of accountability, but there's also a role of compassion. There's also a role of understanding. So when you bring a team together with resources, knowledge, information, and the know-how to help people, and you bring together a court that is compassionate, but yet accountable, that's a perfect combination to help people in crisis. And that's what I do as the presiding judge of Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court. I'll give you a good example. We went into lockdown, and the situation was we had all of our participants kind of out there. And for normal people who are not dealing with mental health and the stress of it, it's hard to be in this crisis situation. But imagine if you're dealing with the crisis on top of a mental health issue, on top of an addiction issue. So what I did and what we did with the team is we set up individual Zoom meetings where every week we reached out to individual participants and had their own Zoom conference with the judge, with the 10-member team, and we dealt with their crisis as they happened. And it was truly amazing. We sent people to rehab. We got people apartments, even when all this was happening. So my time is up, but I'm very excited, and this mental health court that we have in Tompkins County is amazing. And it's gonna grow to be countywide pretty soon, as soon as we can get back in action.
Thank you, Seth. Dan?
Thank you. That's a good question because it is an important topic. And the issue of essentially equipping people to avoid coming back to the criminal justice system is one that's been important to me since I was in law school. That's why I began working in drug courts back in 2001, 2002, when I was working in juvenile drug courts in Fort Collins, Colorado. And when I was promoted in handling adult felony cases, that's why I asked to be reassigned to the felony drug court there in Colorado. When I began working for Gwen Wilkinson, again, I began working in drug courts. I have handled Ithaca City Drug Court, the felony drug court, and the mental health court that Mr. Peacock was just discussing is essentially another application of that same model. It's an attempt to focus resources on folks who need them, people who lack either mental health care, who lack ability to address addiction issues, and a whole host of other life issues. When people come into our felony drug court program, they undergo a screening, and we sit and we talk about them. We talk about their employment needs, if they have any. We talk about their educational needs, what level they're at in their education, if they've completed it or not. We talk about the care that they've already received in their history in terms of substance abuse and mental health treatment. And then we build a plan to go forward and to help these people be successful. So I'm very supportive of the mental health court. It's great to see it expanding. We need to bring these resources to as many people as we can within the criminal justice system.
Great.
Can I
Thank you.
just add a response, please?
Yes, but try to keep it a little under a minute since you
I
went
will.
over a little before.
I went over last time. What I wanted to talk about was this this idea of combining the legal background that Dan spoke to before, that most judges bring, with what you do as a person, what you do as a human being as a judge. And the one of the interesting things I've done when I'm presiding over Ithaca Wellness and Recovery Court is I start each session with a question. And that question could be, what's your favorite food? Where would you like to travel in the world? And the idea is just to get them talking about something other than their latest drug test or their latest crisis. And I start by answering the question myself. So number one, it allows me to connect with them as a human being, but also gets us on a level that we can talk about things. The other thing that I've implemented is I've started to invite community leaders to come into drug court, into Wellness and Recovery Court at the beginning of the session to just say, hi, I'm Mayor Savante Myrick. Your success in this program matters to me. When they see Savante on the street, they can talk to him. That builds community connections and helps people break that chain of isolation. And I'm sorry, I went over again.
Well, we'll work on this moving forward because I do want to really make sure that we give equal time to both candidates. So Dan, if you would like to spend a minute responding to anything along those lines or to talk about something else, please feel free to use that now.
I would, thank you. That's an interesting point that Seth makes in terms of how you address people as the judge when they come into wellness court or drug courts. And how I would do it is this. Several years back, actually about the time Judge Miller took the bench in Ithaca City Courts, we'd had some situations where in felony treatment court, we'd be talking about people for several minutes before one member of the team realized they didn't know who we were talking about. And so I suggested that we essentially create a Facebook of sorts to keep better records about our participants. As a judge, Judge Miller implemented that to his credit. Probation now drafts those and provides them for the team in the city court. But as a judge, I would use that same information when I meet with people in court. When someone steps up, we know them. We know what their employment situation is, if they just got a new job. We know how their kids are doing in school. And so instead of asking them what they had for breakfast, I would ask them something about their life because we know it. And as a judge, before I went to court, I would be prepared to talk to all the participants about their lives. And it's that connection that allows drug court to be successful.
Great. Thank you, Dan. The next question is for you to answer first. Courts are often a place of last resort in that people go there when they've been wronged or when they've done something wrong. Is there anything a judge could do to interrupt that pipeline? A strategy for keeping people from ending up in court in the first place?
Well, I think this is where, oh, there we go. I think this is where we need to distinguish between folks who come to court once and never come back, and folks who come to court and keep coming back. And I think a fair view of the system is that a wildly disproportionate number of the cases relate to a small group of people. I'm not going to name names because it's inappropriate, but there have been occasions where our office is preparing the docket for city court. We're pulling the case files, we're getting ready, and there'll be a single person who has pages worth of cases on that day. And so the way that we keep that person from coming back is dramatically different from the way that we keep the first-time offender from coming in. First-time offenders, a high proportion of them, won't come back. And so in terms of handling the case, we have to be prepared to handle it in a way which doesn't over-penalize them, which doesn't expose them to people in the system that we shouldn't expose them to. We can actually over-treat people and expose them to too much and essentially increases the chance they're going to come back. So we can't do that. Whereas with someone who's been in the system before, we have to treat them differently. They're not going to respond the same way to the sanctions, the incentives that we have. And you have to be aware of that. And that, frankly, is an example of how my experience in drug court for many years is useful. Because I know from that experience, personally, I know how different people respond to the system's efforts at changing their conduct. And so basically that's how I would address this issue, is by utilizing the experience I have, the knowledge of people's response to the system, to reduce the rate at which people come back to the system.
Thank you. Seth?
You know, what's interesting is underlying a lot of Dan's comments was this idea of how people respond to the system. And usually what that involves is how people respond to sanctions imposed by the system. The idea of this sanction-based system is something that a lot of treatment courts are frankly moving away from. I just attended a conference where a lot of the discussion was moving it from the sanction-based to a more positive incentives-based. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because someone struggling in an addiction crisis, their life is usually pretty miserable. And when you can offer them a way out of that, they're with the proper supports, they're very likely to take it. The idea of simple sanction, you know, kind of the Pavlovian bad outcome, bad experience will automatically result in an aversion to that experience is not entirely accurate, because when you look at the life of someone who's struggling with addiction, their life outside of court is pretty miserable. their relationships with their families are broken. Their living situation is unstable. Not to mention the horrible things that they have to do to support that habit. So the court can be certainly a place of last resort. But if you bring innovative, creative ideas and approaches to these situations of crisis, you can really affect people's lives in a powerful way. But not only that, you can affect the whole community in a positive way.
Great, thank you. I've noticed that our timer disappeared, but I'm pretty sure that that was just where we were hoping you would end. So I'm gonna just bring up oh, our timer is back. Wonderful. I was gonna bring up my iPhone as a backup. So are we wanting to move on to the next question, or Dan, would you like to have a response?
I'll respond briefly. I don't think I'll need the full minute or whatever I would be afforded. In drug court, one of the procedures we have, which I think most team members would tell you is frankly one of our most enjoyable portions of working in drug court, is when folks get to the end of the time in drug court and they're successful, we do a debriefing of sort. We have the participant come into the team meeting and we talk to them about why they were successful in the program. And their responses are interesting. Quite often, they'll point to the judge and they'll say, Your Honor, you held me accountable when I needed to be accountable. When I was lying, you didn't buy it. Many of them will also say, Your Honor, there's a time when I had it going well, and you rewarded me for that. You mentioned it, and that meant a lot to me to get that encouragement. So Mr. Peacock's right. It's both sanctions and incentives that allow people to function and succeed in drug court and stay out of the system.
Thank you. Seth, would you like an extra minute?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Great. So the next question, Seth, you will answer first. What experience do you have as a mentor in your career or in general? How, if at all, would you continue in a mentorship role as judge?
This is truly one of the benefits of being in this role. As I stated earlier, I've always taken that, and we'll call it the mentor role, seriously. But I grew up without a father, without that role model, without that experience, and throughout my life now, having kids who are in their 20s, I had to struggle to figure out what that role is as a parent, as a man. And so it was important for me to be that model, to expose those same young kids who, like me, didn't have that role of, hey, this is kind of what it looks like, as imperfect, as I am, and trying to be that role. That's why I coach the kids. That's why I talk to the kids when I see them out. That's why I develop these connections. It's weird now that as judge, I'm in a position where I'm seen more as a sought after mentor, and that, wow, you're a judge and you care more, and it carries a little bit more weight. So one of the great things is in this role, people are more accepting of my mentorship role. The conversations we have are better. They seem to matter more. And that's a true gift of being in this role, is that young people seem to see you as this person of authority, even though you were the same person before you were appointed. And you can have more of an impact, and you can affect young people's lives better. So I take that absolutely seriously. I was just cleaning out a clogged sink in a rental unit of a young person. And while I'm doing this covered in gunk, the young person starts, hey, you're a lawyer, you're a judge. So we had a half an hour conversation about that. And that person was on their way to college, and I gave them some good information, and they have my contact information, and I'm hopeful, but I've had dozens of conversations like that.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. The mentorship that I tend to engage in presently is generally within the office. At this point, I am one of the more senior attorneys in the office, and so it's fairly common, frankly, that I deal with attorneys who have less experience than I do, and we sit down and we talk about their cases and the law, and frankly, discuss a perspective on justice and how we should pursue it. And that is part of being a prosecutor, being an assistant district attorney, is a process of thinking about justice and thinking about how we pursue it. Being a lawyer and starting out working in a district attorney's office, a number of my colleagues and I have sort of surmised over the years, probably takes a good 3 to 5 years before someone is really hitting their stride and is firing on all cylinders in terms of knowing the law and the proceedings and how things work in courts. And for myself, that was certainly the case. When I began practicing, I began learning the ins and outs of being a lawyer. But in the years since that, in addition to knowing all the technical points, the law, all the details, one begins to see the forest in addition to just the trees you're trying to figure out. And frankly, that's why at this point in my career, and again, I've been practicing for 20 years, I have the perspective of both knowing the details on the ground and the broader picture in terms of what our system is supposed to do and the ends it should serve. So as I work with the younger attorneys in our office, that's how I engage in mentorship, is by helping them craft their own sense of justice and their knowledge of the law. And I think as an attorney, that's one of the things we simply have to do, is we have to work with other attorneys to meet the highest legal standards.
Thank you. Dan, the next question you'll answer first. What challenges do you anticipate regarding court operations posed by the COVID-19 crisis and the continuing need for social distancing? How would you address these issues?
That's a great question. On top of that question, frankly, are the changes to our discovery and bail laws, which frankly, we're still implementing. Some haven't even taken effect until July. So the courts have a lot on their plates in those regards between COVID and those changes. And the way that we implement those successfully, frankly, is by collaboration. We work with our partners within the criminal justice system. We work with the people within our own building. And what I mean by that is the judges and the clerks of the court have to work together closely. I have sort of an interesting perspective on this because I practiced in Colorado, where the structure is different. And essentially, the clerks out there are tied more closely to each of the judges, and so they work more together. Here, there's a bit of a distance between the two. It's not deliberate, it's more structural, but it takes work to make sure that the two hands know what each is doing, left hand and right hand. Furthermore, as we implement all the changes to the criminal justice system, it's important to know what the other agencies are doing, what the police are doing, what the prosecution's doing. And I know that because I've worked with the police. I've worked in the district attorney's office. That doesn't mean as a judge you give them what they want, but you have to know how they're functioning if you're going to be able to function with them in a way that ensures justice is delivered as it should be, which means to keep things moving, to move things appropriately fast while still allowing time for the appropriate legal proceedings. In terms of the COVID response, many of the responses which we're currently implementing are basically coming from above. Judicial orders about using Skype, limiting the number of people in court. The real challenges will come when we need to seat a jury or a grand jury, and we have to bring many, many people into the same space to get 12 or 6 jurors for a case. So those challenges are yet to be determined.
Great. Seth?
Thanks. The biggest challenge that we're about to face, and I stated this a bit earlier, is the landlord-tenant situation. In Ithaca, we've had all of our Cornell and IC students who rented literally thousands of apartments leave town. Some left with clear understandings about the terms of the lease, who would be paid what, whether they were allowed to leave early, whether they were responsible for the balance of their lease. And then we also have another large group of landlords who have not been able to enforce their rights as landlords by accessing the court system. So the true difficulty that we're going to face is there's been a 3-month gap where no one's been allowed to file anything on the civil landlord-tenant side. That's going to create an incredible avalanche of filings that will happen the moment the governor gives the okay for those cases to be filed. What's going to be needed to deal with that is have a judge who has that experience, who's ready to go, who's dealing with those cases, who has a background in those cases, so that when those thousands of cases are filed and dealt with, they need to be dealt with effectively. What we're going to have to do is, typically we had one day for landlord tenant and other days for DWI court, criminal court, drug court. We're going to have to double or even triple our time for landlord tenant issues to be resolved. We're going to have a lot more hearings. Before we had a, probably 2 to sometimes 3 month waiting time period for those hearings. We're going to have to speed those up. If students come back, we'll have to clear up those apartments so that the new tenants can be able to lease them clear and have a certainty regarding who has access to that place. So,
Thank you.
So that's my biggest challenge.
Great. Are we going to move on to the next question, or would either of you like an extra minute on this topic?
Just a quick response, if I may.
Yes.
Thanks. Council, Mr. Peacock, sorry, old habits. Mr. Peacock's correct. There will certainly be more landlord-tenant cases as they're on pause by order of the governor. Resolving those takes hard work. That is putting in your time, and that's what I've done in my career. When I've tried cases, I'll work 80, 90 hours because that's what you have to do to get the job done. I've always done that. I've put the time in and I've showed up, and that's what I would do in this circumstance.
Thank you. Seth, would you like any additional time?
No, thank you.
Great. All right, so Seth, you're up next for this question. What do you anticipate will be or is the most challenging part of the job?
It's, I think the most challenging part, and one of the things I'm really focused on is, they say when you become a judge, they call it the robe disease, and that people are deferential to you. In some ways, you're not questioned when you make wrong decisions. And one of the challenges of the job is to have that ability to reflect and assess your actions, your attitudes, your approach towards people. And what I'm really focused on every day is to bring humility and respect and dignity to the whole process. And that starts with the judge. How I interact with defendants, civil litigants, sets the tone for the entire courthouse, from the court officers to the clerks to everyone that interacts in the system. So I'm very focused on setting the tone of respect, because there are difficult people in court are often in a difficult, frustrating situation, and sometimes it's easy as a part of the court system to make them an annoyance, to make a pro se litigant, someone who's representing themselves, because they don't navigate as smoothly as an attorney might, to kind of have this sense of, oh, this is an annoyance. If this person would just get everything right, it could move a lot smoother through the system. Having that patience and keeping that focus on the humility and the respect and the whole process in a respectful way is what I see as a challenge as a judge.
Thank you. Dan.
Thank you. As a judge, the decisions are subject to review. There are ways to appeal these things, but being honest, Ithaca City Court is rarely appealed. In my experience, the judges there are not subject to that review with much frequency. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not saying they're creating errors all over the place. What I'm saying is that the level of the cases results in there not being many appeals from their decisions. So as a result, the judges in Ithaca City Court tend to make decisions that are final and not reviewed by anyone. And as a result, I think we need to ensure that whoever is making those decisions is putting the work in, knows the law, and is committed to being fair for everyone. And that's been my career. I've put the work in. I've worked hard to be fair for the victims that I've worked with. I've worked hard to be fair for the defendants I've prosecuted, the clients I've represented, and the community that I live in. And frankly, in looking at being a judge, that's how I would approach that.
Thank you. So the next question can be a really quick answer. And Dan, you'll be up first. Will you support the individual that wins this upcoming primary?
Well, that's an interesting question, and my answer will not be a quick yes or no by way of fair warning. We're in an interesting situation where my opponent has run for this very job before and chose to not do that. And I don't have a problem with that. Frankly, last fall, there was an election for judge for a county court position that was uncontested. And I think our community loses an opportunity to have a discussion about these things. So I'm not going to say if I would or I wouldn't, but I think those sort of commitments hurt the system, especially in a town like this, where the registrations are heavily Democrat. There are, as far as I can determine, virtually almost no Republicans in town, and a very small number of other party members. And so frankly, I think if we're going to have a real election in the fall, there is a value in it being contested.
Great, thank you. Seth?
Thanks. Yes, I first of all plan to be the Democratic nominee, but if unfortunately that's not the case, I will certainly support Dan.
Thank you. So we have concluded our questions, and now we will move into our closing statements, which will be 2 minutes each. And I want to ask the two of you to really keep to that 2 minutes. We're going to have Seth close first, followed by Dan. So Seth, you're up.
Thanks again for allowing us this opportunity to reach out to voters. A lot of what you probably heard me talk about relates to this sense of building community through this role as judge in Ithaca City Court. One of the things that I want people to reflect on is the idea of why you're law-abiding. It's typically not because you're afraid of getting caught. You typically have a law-abiding person because they have a stake in the community. They feel part of it. They don't feel alienation that many folks are expressing with the protest and all that's going on today. That alienation is something that I think is critical to how we engage with people in our community. As a judge, I try my best to deal with that alienation from a human point of view, from having people understand that they will be treated fairly in this process. When you come into court and you know what the judge is about, he's not alien to you. You believe in this person. That can affect your behavior in how you feel connected to the community. What I talked about, what I do in mental health court, is I bring community members. I've had the superintendent of schools come in. I plan to have the mayor, legislatures, even shop owners come in to develop those connections with folks so that alienation is broken down. Yes, you can issue decisions. Yes, you can follow the law. But what's really critical and what really makes you an effective judge is your ability to make community connections so that we as Ithacans have a stronger community from the top to the bottom.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Dan.
Thank you. I want to again thank the committee for putting this all together. Mr. Peacock likes to talk about community, and I agree, our community is tremendously important. As a judge, our community is having a conversation about who we want on the bench. And ultimately, a judge needs, first and foremost, to be an expert in the law. because that's why we have a judge. Mr. Peacock is talking about bringing in community members, and I'm certain that if I asked those same folks, they'd come in. I don't know them as well as Mr. Peacock does, but I'm pretty sure if I've reached out to the mayor and said, Mr. Mayor, would you come to court? I'm sure he would do that. Same thing for the superintendent. I don't think I know him as well as Mr. Peacock, but if I asked, I'm sure he would come in. But more importantly, when I came to court, I would be prepared. I would know the cases, I would know the law, and when people came before me, I would treat them with the sort of respect, the sort of understanding that I know to be important. And I know to be important because my years in court, in regular court, in drug court, have shown me how people are affected by what happens in court, by the way that the judge talks to them, by the way that the judge affords them an opportunity to speak, by the way he addresses their attorney. And because of all that experience, and because I do know the law extremely well, that's how I would serve the community.
Thank you. Excellent timing as well. So at this point, we have concluded all of our questions and our closing statements. So I am going to turn it back over to Ed Swayze, who is our city chair. He hopefully will appear on the screen in a moment. Here he is. So Ed just needs to unmute. Here he is, and take it away, Ed.
Great, thank you. For some reason, I'm not seeing myself here, but okay. Anyway, I don't need to see myself. I want to just say that the city of Ithaca and our community is very fortunate to have two people of this caliber stepping up to serve the community in this role as city judge. So thank you both, Seth and Dan, for being here, and thank you for your previous work and your continuing work in whatever role. I would also like to thank here Liz Hartman, who stepped in to this role and carried it out so professionally that I'm not surprised, but I'm very thankful. Also, Scott Brim, who stepped in to be the timer. And I must say that both of these people are not from the city, but from the town of Ithaca. And we very much appreciate their help. And then finally, Jennifer Lyons, who in the background has worked to set up a lot of this. And Ted Crane, who's our Zoom technical person. And all of these are Tompkins County Democratic Committee members. And we thank them from the bottom of our hearts, because I couldn't have done this by myself. And also, just as a final thought, I just urge everyone to please get the information you need, get your absentee ballots in. If you're not voting absentee, get the information for how to vote early and where to vote. And let's have a blue wave in the city of Ithaca and Tompkins County. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
You bet.